MiamiHal, and this is Anna. She is a councilwoman in Pinecrest, and I don't dare try your last name because this paper gets it wrong all the time in print, let alone in how you say it. So Anna, please tell our audience, because we're going to spend a half an hour getting to know you better. We better have your last name pronounced properly.
Most people in America pronounce it Hochkammer with a long A.
Right.
Or excuse me, a long O. And, but anything remotely close, I will raise my hand. Hochkammer, Hockenberger, Hochmeyer.
I think it was a Hochkammer.
You name
for a
it.
while. What is the true pronunciation?
So
like?
It's so the distant relatives in Germany pronounce it something to the effect of Hochkammer, right? My father likes to give it a little extra gargle every once in a while just to upset people occasionally. Hochkammer. But yeah, Hochkammer is probably the easiest for people. Hochkammer.
Everybody pause for a moment. Hochkammer. Anna Hochkammer, councilwoman in Pinecrest. She's also, for a very long time, been an activist in our community doing lots of great projects. And I've had the pleasure of knowing you for many, many years. So welcome to our show.
We knew each other as parents at Palmetto High back in the day.
Yeah, absolutely. So we are here for two purposes. One, if anybody in the audience doesn't know who this woman is, you need to. She's a wonderful person. She's outgoing and does a lot of good things for our community. And also you serve on the council in Pinecrest, and we're going to be doing a focus on my show for the next couple of weeks about a lot of good things that are happening in Pinecrest. So I want your take on those.
Sure.
And then, as always, I remind our audience members, you're in front of a social media platform. There's a little box where you can interact. So please do that. Our producer will let us know when questions come in, and we'll be happy to get to those during the show. So, Anna, let's start off with, you have a seat on council, and there's a lot of things going on. But in particular, let's start off with the pet projects or things that you in particular want to drive home and really make better for the village of Pinecrest.
Well, I think, there's a difference, I think, between pet projects and the really important projects. And I think the really important projects we've all been working on for several years, and they've been very long-term. Potable water was an issue in Pinecrest, has been an issue since incorporation. We were finally able to get funding from various sources and finish out once and for all the potable water backbone in Pinecrest. And it's been a very long time coming. And we feel a real sense of accomplishment that we've gotten that done. It doesn't mean that the problems disappeared, because now we have the corollary problem of sewer, which is a huge countywide issue, and that's the next hill to climb. That's our next Mount Everest. But you just keep working and you get it done. We've been able to deal with undergrounding and getting undergrounding through FPL underway in the village, which was a very long time coming. We started talking with FBL, fighting with SBL, depending on which council and which mayor was in charge at the time, about the constant outages and how long it was taking Pinecrest to recover from storm events. And now we have FPL investing tens of millions of dollars in Pinecrest to underground. And I think over the next 20 years, their plan is to basically underground all of the laterals in Pinecrest. That's been a huge accomplishment.
So I'm working on this story. I understand what lateral means, but maybe our audience members do not. So tell us about what an electric lateral is.
Well, so there's basically two kinds of electric lines that are running into the city. You've got your lines that transmit. Those are the great big fat poles, the concrete poles that people see. They're bringing in a lot of charge, and then you have the little lines that go down into the neighborhoods and provide power to individual homes. And we have hundreds of miles of those lateral lines in our village, in our 7.5 square miles. Those laterals are what's being undergrounded. The transmission lines are not, the laterals are.
Right. And the transmission lines on the big poles you were talking about are up high. Yeah. So they don't typically get interaction with vegetation, trees. It's the lateral lines that are down lower, that often have things brush up against them. They can even start fires, but often what they're really doing is having blips of power outages.
Right.
And then, of course, during a storm, when you've got heavy winds,
Yeah.
things get ugly, right?
Well, I always joke, a butterfly can flap its wings in Hialeah and we can lose power in Pinecrest. I mean, part of it has to do with the fact that we have such a lush and attractive tree canopy. This is one of the things Pinecrest wanted, was one of the first initiatives of the council after incorporation, was to plant a huge number of trees. Remember, Pinecrest used to be pretty darn barren. When we incorporated, we were still just a couple of years out of Hurricane Andrew. Hurricane Andrew had come through and just flattened, huge swaths of the community. And so it was get those trees in the ground as quickly as you can. We now are 25 years on and we're starting to have some mature trees. So the problem shifted to tree maintenance. Are they the right kind of trees, or are they in the right place? On top of that, it's interesting, a lot of the hardening, that's what they call when they came in and they put those cement poles in, the big fat ones and also the smaller squared off ones. Pinecrest asked for that after the hurricane season of, I think, 2007, when I think we were walloped by 3 or 4 different hurricanes in a single season. Pinecrest went to FPL and the Public Service Commission and said, look, you've got to harden this. We can't possibly continue to have power outages like this. Government, working at the pace that it works, came back 10 years later and said, here we are. We have our hardened poles. We're ready to install them. And a lot of the people who lived along those streets said, wait a minute, we don't want these big, ugly poles. What are you talking about? I mean, in the interim, because of course government sometimes moves at a snail's pace, taste changed, and now it became, no, we don't want these big ugly poles, we want undergrounding, right? Luckily, FPL was able to acknowledge and convince the PSC that the kind of maintenance that's required in a community as lush as ours, and that is as protective of its tree canopy as Pinecrest is, it just makes sense to underground, because the number one, the service interruptions are constant, and number two, it costs a huge amount of money to maintain them, to maintain those lines and maintain the trees. So we believe, and FPL has stated pretty clearly, that they expect to underground, for all intents and purposes, the whole city, at least the laterals, over the next 15 to 20 years.
That's great.
So, government is a long-term process, right? Some of what we do is very of the moment. I have this issue, I have a pothole, I have a barking dog, I have a loud macaw. I want somebody to fix this immediate problem. But a lot of what we do requires the ability to envision a solution.
Yeah.
And because we have term limits, because we're not kings and queens who sit here for decades at a time, it requires us to keep working projects and keep working problems in such a way that the next council that comes along and the next elected official that comes along is in a better position than when we started to keep the fight going. And I think Pinecrest has a long history of that. And that's one of the reasons why we're able to tackle a 25-year problem with potable water and a 25-year problem with FPL service, and some of these really long-term issues that aren't easy to solve and take a lot of elected officials and a lot of councils over a lot of years to finally get them to a point where we can say, okay, we got that one solved. Check. What's next?
Good.
Right.
Well, speaking of what's next, 3 weeks from now, sitting in your chair will be a representative from Florida Power and Light. We're going to talk about this from their perspective.
Mm-hmm.
But at the beginning of the show, you were saying, listen, there's some pet projects and then there's some important projects.
Mm-hmm.
You touched very briefly on the potable water project.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us what your what you see in the way of the potable project? Because I know that's not with a governmental or an outside agency. You're actually doing that within the village with its own public works, correct?
So what's going on is we had about 700 and a bit homes that were well dependent. They didn't have access to the potable water lines. It had been an ongoing question in Pinecrest for years about how we were going to finally finish this once and for all. And I think it's very interesting that a few years ago we did a referendum. We had a group of homeowners that were well dependent who really wanted the village of Pinecrest to float a bond. $12 to $15 million was the estimate at the time. Build out the potable water and then give it to Miami-Dade County Water and Sewer Department for them to operate, generate revenue from, and maintain. That was a really novel and quite controversial concept, because it would be taking basically the largest amount of money that the village had ever bonded for any reason, building something, and then giving it away, right? Not controlling it ourselves, not maintaining it ourselves, right? And so we made the decision to put it up for a referendum because it was such an unusual idea. I believed at the time, and it turned out that I was correct, that it wasn't going to pass, that Pinecrest was going to vote and say, no, don't do this. And a lot of people saw that as somehow a defeat. I saw it as a very useful piece of information, because what it did was it just lopped one option off the decision tree. It said that question's been answered. If the question is, does Pinecrest want to do this? The answer is no, which meant that when we got American Rescue Plan funds, and one of the approved uses from these federal dollars was to build out potable water, we didn't end up in a fight.
Rang the bell
internal community fight about, well, it's not going to cover all of it. And are we going to do a special taxing district, or are we going to do bonds, or are we going to do, what are we going to do? No, it was, no, we're going to do this. The homes that really wanted it were almost unanimously accepting of having a special taxing district in order to pay for the last quarter or so of the cost. And we were able to get shovels in the ground, get it bid out, shovels in the ground, and get it built almost immediately. I think it was the first American Rescue Plan funded infrastructure project in Miami-Dade County. Certainly might have even been in the state of Florida. Wow. Because we were shovel ready, and because we'd done the hard work and asked those hard questions of the community over time. Right. We didn't just wait. That kind of proactivity and the constant working of the problem over and over and over again is a hallmark of how Pinecrest deals with issues. And in this case, we can see the results. I mean, they're out there, they're laying these lines. They should be done within a year, 18 months. And people who want to hook into them immediately have the opportunity to do so. Otherwise, they have about 10 years, unless the property turns over. There's some sort of significant remodel to the property, and we will have that problem solved. And it's not just because we got American Rescue Plan funds; it's because councils in Pinecrest have been working on it methodically ever since. And the great news is we even have the opportunity to get more funds from the state of Florida right now, if we don't get vetoed by the governor, to even cover a significant portion of what was left over and what was going to be covered by our residents under the special taxing district. If that money comes in, we'll apply it to the project, and the special taxing district burden will be minimal. Really, truly minimal.
That's amazing news, actually.
Yeah.
You had mentioned not the council, but councils. And so there's been this spirit of cooperation and handing off the baton to the next council for years in Pinecrest. And it just seems like things get done so quietly and smoothly in Pinecrest, and there's some other communities where it's not like that. Why do you think Pinecrest has this almost unique ability to just cooperate among council people and the residents and get things done?
Well, I mean, I think we have the first councils really kind of set the tone. I think Pinecrest in particular always went out of its way, that first council, to make sure that everybody was pretty simple, everybody was straightforward. We were never ones for a lot of ceremony and fanciness in general in Pinecrest. And I think you can see that when we have a very simple small council chamber. Council members don't have assigned parking. We don't have offices in Village Hall. We don't have any of the things that some cities feel is important.
There's no Anna Hochkammer parking space for you?
There's not the mayor doesn't have a parking spot. I don't have a parking spot. As part of just general security, because American society is changing. We now have a new entryway in City Hall, and there's a metal detector there, and we ask people to go through it. And when we were initially, and this is a couple of years ago, talking about this remodel, staff's initial recommendation was that everybody had to go through these metal detectors except council. And council all looked at her and said,
No,
absolutely not. We all need to go through the metal detector. If people who are visiting and our residents are going through the metal detector, we're all going through the metal detector. And I think that's sort of culture of being, among equals has served us incredibly well. And I think a lot of the really difficult problems that we deal with in Pinecrest, because we know that they're not going to be easy solves, because we know that they're going to take many years, if not decades of work to solve, leads most of us to understand that we not only need to not necessarily just do the thing that's politically expedient at this moment, which is the way a lot of cities work, but we need to set subsequent councils up to be successful. And that's the only way that we're really going to be able to solve problems over a decade or two in Pinecrest. And when we do long-term planning, when we think about infrastructure, when we talk about our budgets, we don't just think about, can I do something that'll make people happy today? We think, can I do something that's going to be good for the health, the financial health, and the community health of Pinecrest over the next decade or two? And am I going to hamstring a future council and being able to act in the best interest of the community?
Wow.
That is a unique thing in Pinecrest, and it has served us well over time.
It certainly has, and it seems like, again, I haven't heard that from anybody else, that you're really thinking about the future generations of council and the village itself.
Yeah.
In your decision making. That's important, obviously, and it shows.
Yeah.
So we've been over the important projects. Let's hit a pet project or two of yours. What would you like to see Pinecrest improve on or do in the next couple of years?
Well, one of the things that's been very important to me since I joined council was to work on equal pay, for example. One of the first things I sponsored in Pinecrest was a resolution committing the city to pay our male and female employees equally. And the largest single department in Pinecrest is our police department. And oftentimes you have kind of a very male-dominated culture in our police departments, because policing is a very male-dominated industry. And at the time, our chief, Sam Ceballos, an old school Hispanic cop from Miami-Dade, when he first heard me talking about it, invited me into his office, and he said, I have 3 daughters, and I want my daughters to be paid fairly.
Wow.
And I support what you're doing. And so he became one of my great allies in working on creating a culture of equal pay, on making the Pinecrest Police Department in particular a place that was welcoming to women, to young women starting out in their careers, where they were going to be treated respectfully, they were going to be promoted, and they were going to be compensated based on their merits. And because of that, the Pinecrest Police Department has about 25% of its sworn officers women, which sounds low. But for a mid-sized police department, that's about twice the national average. Most mid-sized police departments are at the 10 to 15% female sworn officers. So we are clearly a place where young women in criminal justice want to come and work and want to start their careers. So I'm particularly proud of that. And I think it reflects, number one, kind of a tradition of female leadership in Pinecrest. I mean, Evelyn Greer, of course, she would probably hate the phrase the mother of Pinecrest, but let's call her the mother of Pinecrest. Certainly the first leader of Pinecrest really sort of created an atmosphere in which women and their voices and their life experiences were really valued. The other thing that I've been working very hard on is making sure that our relationships with our schools, public and private in Pinecrest, is as strong as possible. I mean, I'm obviously still have my youngest still as a junior in high school. My actual involvement in Pinecrest started when I first moved here in 2009 through PTA and PTSA in the public schools. And I think schools are the fact that you can live in Pinecrest and send your kids to schools within our community makes us somewhat unique among Miami-Dade County, the highly desirable Miami-Dade County communities. And I always say schools are our number one industry. We have about 8,000 school-age kids who live in Pinecrest, and we have another 8,000 that come in to attend our various institutions over the course of the year. So that is what we do. We do schools.
So we really met over some of the community involvement you did surrounding our schools.
Mm-hmm.
And ever since then, I've looked at you and said, that is somebody with a ton of energy, and you keep driving. Do you have any future aspirations that we don't know about so far, about what you want to do for the community or the area in general?
I'm very committed to Pinecrest as a place. I moved to Pinecrest when I was 35 years old, and I had 3 little kids. My daughters were 10, 6, and 4. I grew up in Michigan, so I'm American, but I came from overseas. I'd lived in Ecuador for 15 years. And Pinecrest really embraced me. And over the last, 12, 13 years, it's a place that has not only been good for my kids and good for me, it's a place that's helped me in good times and bad. Personal issues, health issues, kid issues. This is a community that's wrapped its arms around me and said, "You're home." But that said, I'm now, 6 years into doing municipal work. I have a lot of experience, I think, dealing with county, dealing with the state. I see places where my experience might be useful. So, if the opportunity presented itself, I think I would strongly consider it. I think there are ways to advocate for Pinecrest at the state and at the state level in particular that aren't necessarily obvious unless you've been trying to get the state of Florida to let you do your job, which can be difficult in a political atmosphere where Tallahassee is so focused on preemption of local governments. I love politics. I love supporting other people who want to get into politics, in particular women who want to get into politics. I'm very active in groups that recruit and mentor women who want to run for office, particularly that first time when you're really a babe in the woods and you're not quite sure what you're doing. And I think the political arena is a place where, I'll be for conceivably as long as I've got the use of my faculties. We'll see how long that is.
It'll be a few more years. You had said that the community kind of wrapped its arms around you. And what I do day in and day out is selling and helping people buy real estate. Pinecrest is, again, a unique place for that with very high values. And, when you get to do work inside Pinecrest, it feels special. What do you know of, the real estate market for Pinecrest? And is there anything that the council kind of has in the back of their mind as they go about their normal business trying to help the village?
Well, I think like everybody, we just kind of end up a little bit open-mouthed as we watch the prices skyrocket because some of these prices really, take your breath away. My views on Pinecrest real estate probably are a little bit different because I have occupied so many sectors within the Pinecrest real estate market.
That's why I asked.
When I moved here overseas in 2009, I had 3 little kids and we rented a house near Coral Pine Park and lived there for a year and sort of got a feel for the community. I think we knew right away, okay, this is where we're going to stay. And we went house shopping, bought a house on 61st Court near the community center and the library, which at the time was great because I wanted to be able to walk the kids over to classes and to the Pinecrest Gardens and to the library and all that kind of stuff. Eventually bought a larger house on West Suburban. I'm now on the verge of being an empty nester because my daughter's finishing her junior year of my youngest daughter is finishing her junior year of high school. And so I sold my house in the middle of pandemic to a young couple who were on Miami Beach with toddlers. And it was time for a yard and schools and all the rest of it. And I thought to myself, I'm ready for something other than, 5 bedrooms and 5 bathrooms on an acre with a dozen trees. And I'm now the owner of a townhouse in Swan Lake, and remodeling it and renting a lovely condo in the reserve where you live.
Yeah.
So I've kind of occupied all of these niches. And so I think of real estate as something that a community as family focused as we are, and the kind of place that people want to stay in through all the stages of their life, as a place where we need to just make sure that people aren't forced out of the community as where they are in their lives change. I ran into a local county court judge at an event the other day, and she said, "Oh, my mother just moved out of Pinecrest. She and all of her friends have moved out of Pinecrest. They didn't want the single family homes anymore, and so they moved to condos and they moved to townhouses." And I thought to myself, it's kind of a shame that people get to that stage. And there just isn't a lot of stock available for people to move into something a little bit smaller, and that's a little bit easier for them to manage. So I'm very interested in figuring out how that part of Pinecrest can be stronger and strengthen our families in our community.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
By the way, not being rude, I'm trying to crane my neck.
Yeah,
Maybe you can see the question over there because I can't. George has asked a question. Let's see if we can make it a little bit bigger.
Sure. It said, Councilwoman, what would be your top three wishes for your city if money wasn't a problem? What would be the top three wishes for my city? Well, I think converting the septic to sewer is a huge issue for us. Yeah. It's a major engineering problem, incredible price tag. We're very lucky that we have a county commissioner, Raquel Regalado, who is very focused on it. I mean, I always joke that when the two of us end up in the same space together, we end up talking about, sanitary sewers. Yeah. It's great dinner conversation. But we both recognize
You're a stinking business. I think it's one of the septic tank companies.
But we both recognize, this needs to happen. Yeah. The water table is rising. The people's drain fields are failing. We have saltwater intrusion coming in from the bay. I think all of Miami-Dade County has this septic to sewer issue hanging over its head. Yeah. Luckily, Mayor Levine Cava is very aware of what needs to happen. And it looks like we're going to start getting some federal dollars in order to help Miami-Dade County deal with it. But that, if I could snap my fingers and say, let's fix something, that would be the infrastructure problem. I think from a quality of life perspective, we have, as established in our last Parks and Recreation strategic plan, the center part of Pinecrest is kind of a park desert. Almost all of our parks are located
more to the northern side.
Well, either along the US 1 or our county parks and regional parks are located, at Chapman Field, at Matheson Hammock. I think if the standard that generally is used in the U.S. is that people should be living no more than a mile away from a park of some kind, we have a park desert in the center of Pinecrest.
Is there something that could be targeted for, for park to eventually be there? I'm trying to think of
you could do much like what we did with the purchase of what's going to be the future Gary Matzner Park at the corner of Ludlam and 88th is, if you have a property that comes online, even if it's a small one, they're called pocket parks. Right. You buy it, you trim the trees and cut the grass. It's not necessarily a major redevelopment, but it gives people a little bit of breathing space and an access to, kick the ball around, run around. So I think Parks and Rec, particularly just acreage, is a major issue for Pinecrest. And then I think if I had a wish for Pinecrest, it would be to make sure that particularly our public schools remain as strong as they are, as supported as they are by the community. Obviously, they're run by Miami-Dade County Public Schools, and we have a great school board member in Luisa Santos, and she's been a fantastic ally for us, just like Dr. Feldman was before he retired. They've just invested well over $50 million in redeveloping Palmetto High School. If you haven't seen it, you should go see it, tour it. It's amazing. It's an amazing space. It took 10 years for that to happen. I always tell people my youngest was in first grade when I was marching door to door trying to convince people to vote for that bond. She's now a junior in high school, and we're just about to finish the project, right?
At least she got to see some of the results,
right? I mean, so
halls there.
You know, and there were an awful lot of people there, you know, from Gina Vinuesa to former Mayor Cindy Lerner to you know, Linda Dwyer and all the previous PTA presidents who've been there bird dogging that project all the way through. They've done a fabulous job. But we need to make sure that public schools and access to high quality public education within our neighborhoods is a desirable option for our residents, because it is a thing that makes Pinecrest unique. The idea that you can go to your neighborhood public school and get a high quality education.
All right, we've got very little time left, and you've talked about all these amazing things. There's one little thing I just want to ask you about.
Okay.
You have a little pet peeve about leaf blowers, right?
Well, actually, the leaf blowers aren't my pet peeve. My pet peeve is people parking on the sidewalk.
Okay, let's talk quickly about that. 30 seconds. Tell people why they shouldn't be parking on the sidewalk.
I am a huge walker.
Yeah.
I walk miles and miles and miles every day. And I encourage everybody else out there who walks, who sees stuff that needs to get fixed, to text the police chief, to text me, to text anybody and let us know. You know, sidewalks exist so that people can walk at them, and in Florida,
yes,
bicycles can ride on them.
Yeah.
And if we've got people parking on the sidewalks, particularly because most of our sidewalks are on our section line and half section line roads, they're on our busiest roads. You've got people in wheelchairs, you've got people on bicycles, and you've got pedestrians wandering out into 104th Street and 72nd Avenue trying to get around them. So my pet peeve is, and I report it all the time, and I post I'm famous. I post a picture on my Instagram story with a picture of the truck or the car blocking the sidewalk and the word underneath, no.
Well,
that's my pet peeve.
We want to say yes a lot more in Pinecrest. Anna Hochkammer, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate what you're doing in Pinecrest.
Thanks.
And to those of us in the audience, have a great week. We'll see you next week. We've got lots of good guests coming up.